Hey there, my name is Ebony Smith, and I want to welcome you back to the Gray Space, which is an open forum for us to learn, discuss, and take action on behalf of our Black and Brown communities. So, this is one of the beginning of the series that I'll be going into, just talking about things that affect our communities and why this work that we do is so important. What is the purpose for saying, we really want to lean into the Black and Brown communities? Yes, there is issue worldwide. There are always things going on in everyone's community. However, today's discussion is going to talk about why I have decided to really lean more into Black and Brown communities and what's happening, or better yet, what has not been happening in those communities. All right. So, we're talking about redlining today. And if you are unfamiliar with the term, most likely if you're watching this, you're probably very familiar, or listening to this, you're probably very familiar with the idea of redlining. So, redlining is essentially just refusing a loan, refusing insurance to someone, not because they weren't worthy of it through their credit, not because they didn't have the amount of capital or assets needed, simply because of where they live, where they come from. And most likely, these areas are the Black and Brown communities, most likely. And there are communities where they just see that where you're coming from was not deemed good. It wasn't deemed the best. It was deemed undesirable. And so a lot of people think that, hey, this work is not as important anymore because, well, redlining doesn't still happen. Anyone can go and sit in a mortgage officer's space and go and get a mortgage now. So this isn't something that we need to worry about. But that's the issue. That's not true. And so a lot of the initiatives that are coming out now, whether it be through federal, state, or even just based on your city initiatives, they are happening because what was done all these years ago, which really wasn't that long ago, it wasn't just what was happening at that time before the policies were put in place to be able to stop this redlining or at least attempt to slow it down. The issue with redlining is in the immediate, it made it where it was difficult to go and get a mortgage to purchase a home. Difficult to say you were going to sell your home in that kind of climate as well. So it confined people to a specific area in these cities or specific zip codes in these cities and made it where they were not only not able to get access, they were forgotten about, disinvested. So we hear that word a lot. What that means is not only are we not going to give you what you're looking for, we're also going to forget about this area. We're not going to prioritize this area when it comes to money, when it comes to time, when it comes to effort, when it comes to policies that would support this area. And so redlining had major effects during that time based on this article that I was able to kind of go through and read, which I will link in the post copy for you. Redlining in the immediate had impacts just based on wealth. So we see even now that there is a large gap, and I mean from 1 million down to about 200,000. The gap between wealth between a Black household and a white household is absolutely significant, even now during this time. And so when you restrict access to home ownership, you are also restricting the growth through wealth by having a home and having that equity in that home. So you created a ripple effect that would forever create this space between how much wealth a Black household could have. Immediately setting it apart and saying, so now generationally, decades later, your household is most likely going to make significantly less over a lifetime compared to a white household. There are some other issues that happen with redlining, though, wealth being one of them that was significant, but it opened up the door for future disinvestment, even what we're seeing now. There are certain practices and systems in home ownership that are still existing. There are manuals that still have specific ways to do things that are considered discriminatory. Despite the policies that have been put in place, those things of home ownership are still happening even now. But it's not just having the barriers to home ownership that are systemic. This opened up the door for other places where there would be inequity. Healthcare. These same neighborhoods are the same neighborhoods where the life expectancy, if you live within this specific zip code, life expectancy is cut short. Education. If you live in this specific zip code, your child most likely won't finish school, or they will only make it to a certain level of school. Or even if they do get through and they finish high school, based on where they live, they most likely will only be able to make a certain amount of salary over a lifetime, which is significantly less than that same salary outcome for a white household in a different area. Not only that, workforce development, dependence on certain government entities and certain government services and grants. All across these different sectors, there's disinvestment. And so redlining didn't just create this atmosphere where it was difficult to buy a house or sell a home in these areas. You literally are sentencing people to have a negative quality of life all the way through, starting from birth to death. And when you look at all the different age groups, when you look at workforce development, when you look at crime, everyone's so quick to jump on crime and say, well, we need to, what is the quick fix for crime? There is no quick fix for crime. There is no quick fix for any of this, because what you're looking at is decades and decades of saying, we don't care because you live in this zip code. And we're going to create policies, we're going to create systems that will continue to exist decades later that exclude these zip codes. So all of the negative outcomes that are associated with redlining have been embedded for years. For years. And it was not an overnight process to put these policies in place. Therefore, it's not going to be an overnight process to go on the policy level and start making changes. So now that we understand the impacts of what's happening now and how we're seeing current issues in these communities where the people are struggling financially, food insecurity, access to health care, negative health outcomes because of that lack of access to health care. Crime increases because of that lack of access to workforce, that lack of access to quality education across the board. So this isn't just one thing. This is a ripple effect across the entirety of someone's life, across all factors. So what does that mean? That means now that from a policy place, that's number one. We've started to try to make some tractions there. We've seen that in different administrations. We've seen that in different local levels of trying to say, from a home ownership standpoint, how do we put these acts in place to try to pivot away from what is considered normal? Which is why you have to be careful when you say, well, it's legal. There were a lot of things that were legal that weren't good. Slavery at one point was legal. Jim Crow laws at one point were legal. That doesn't make them good. That doesn't mean that it's something that should continue. And the only way, though, that something that is accepted as normal is stopped is it must first be acknowledged, dealt with, and disrupted. If you don't disrupt it and disrupt the pattern that it creates, then you will continue to have the same outcome over and over and over. So yes, there has to be policies in place to correct what has happened. So you hear so many people say, well, I don't understand why this was created for just one group of people. That doesn't seem fair. Where's mine? Yours is in the standardized version of our country. You fit within that standard. So what we're having to do now is going to create an amendment, if you will, to our country to include those who systemically were excluded based on what happened all these years ago. So they weren't included to begin with. So yes, now you have to go and do specific acts and specific things to include the people who were not included. Now, once you move on from policy, then what? What happens after policy? Well, what happens after policy, where we go and we get the acts in place, words are not enough. Words are not enough. The policies in themselves are a good start, but we're talking about a lack of investment. A lack of investment to upkeep these structures and homes, a lack of investment to build quality schools, a lack of investment to provide programs within those schools, a lack of investment to make sure that there were economic development happening in these areas where businesses are wanting to move in and create employees and create an area where there is some sort of ability to make a wage. That's not poverty. There was a lack of investment over decades to do that. So what do you have to come with? Investment. Investment. There has to be an investment all the way to the federal level, all the way down to the city, neighborhood level. And not just money, but an investment of time, an investment of volunteers, an investment of strategic thinking of how do you create new systems now that include everyone. And oftentimes that takes money. So, yes, you'll see specific things now in certain administrations that will say, hey, we're going to create a grant that is specific to this group. We're going to create a coalition, which is a group, which is a specific group dedicated their time, their energy to righting something that's wrong, a specific issue that they want to tackle, whether that be gun violence in certain communities, whether that be public health for a Black woman, because she is more likely to die during childbirth than any other group. Yes, you must now take the money and invest back into these communities that have not had them over a long amount of time. So, where do I come into this, and where do I see myself, and where do I see other people who work within my area in this entire story? I see us in a couple places. When I think of this work, I see myself as, first and foremost, I am not even just an ally because I'm a part of it. I'm a product of being in one of those neighborhoods. So this hits home to me. So I'm more than just a supporter in this. This is something that is a responsibility for me because I understand what it means to grow up in one of these disinvested communities. I know what it means to have lack of access across the board to all of these things. So first and foremost, I'm not even a supporter, I'm not even a participant. I am a part of it. This is as important to me as it is any of the other work that I do because it means change in a community where I come from. After being someone who is within the work, I think the other part that I play and that people who are in this position play, we are the storytellers. We are the storytellers. We are literally the people as marketers in this work. We are the ones who have an opportunity to shed light on things like the article that I just read. There are people who would never sit down and read an article about redlining and going through and realizing that, man, this was the catalyst for a decade, of decades and decades of inequity that we see now, which is why I'm making this video for several reasons. Because if we don't tell these stories and we don't explain what it means, if we don't continue to have the impact of this systemic racism in the air and why we must continuously push for investment and impact, who will? Who will? I went to a conference and I heard something that has been just sticking with me ever since then. That whose problem is this? When we talk about inequity, whose problem is it? And everyone in the crowd said, everyone. It's everyone's problem. He said, no, it's not everyone's problem because everyone doesn't care about this problem. It's not everyone's problem. It's our problem because we care about it. It's ours. And so when I look at marketers and where we live, it's our problem to help to amplify the issue, but also use our methods to amplify the solutions. The solutions that are put forth from a federal level, the solutions that are put forth, I would say, on the grassroots level, people on the grounds, in the communities, hands-on. It's up to us to tell these stories so that we can show this is where the investment is. This is why the investment is necessary. It's crucial. It's critical. At no point do we have a chance to take our foot off the gas. At no point do we have the ability to do that because we are fighting an uphill battle every single day. Every single day. So where else can we be found in this work? When you see initiatives from a federal level, amplify it, share it, share it. Where I like to work is creating more access for these initiatives, especially things from like the White House, things from like a state level. How can I help to grow the eyes that see it? No matter where you fall in the action area, you may be someone who is an elected official and you're able to go and vote in favor of certain policies and certain grants, certain initiatives. You may be someone who is just someone who's willing to put a sign in your yard, someone who's willing to sign a petition. That is necessary as well. You may be someone that says, hey, I can make some of the investment the financial investment to create a program after school for the kids. Maybe you're on a corporate level and you're able to do a partnership for these other organizations that are on the grounds doing the work. The key message here is the reason why there is a focus in Black and Brown communities is not that I exclude other communities or that I would not work with other communities that need support. Quite honestly, the majority of the work that I have that I'm approached about is because the greatest need is in these communities, because they've been completely forgotten about for decades. So you're going to see most of the initiatives for these areas. You're going to see most of the financial grants sent out for this area. You're going to see a lot of focus and energy, I hope, in these areas because they're the ones that need it. They're the ones that need it. You can look at the map and see on the map how they completely outline certain zip codes in the same city. How can the quality of life and life expectancy be so different in this area, which is a few steps over from that area, two different zip codes, and yet there is the difference between life and death in those two areas, except that it was systemically forced. It was literally written into rule books to make it so. That's the only way that you keep that up. And that's the only way that you keep that up, even down to where we are now, which is still happening. It's going to take a collective group, a collective work across all these different industries. I'm just in marketing, but it's not going to take just marketing. It's going to take marketing, and it's going to take a lot of other groups to come together to be specific in how we attack this. However, I believe that while it didn't, something I wrote down for Gracefull Grind Strategies is it didn't begin with us, but that doesn't mean it can't end with us. It can absolutely end with us joining the work as your partner, as you go out and you go and look at these outcomes, which are often grim outcomes. It doesn't mean that we can't partner with you and we fight collectively to right this, to make it where the gap doesn't exist. Maybe not for our current kids, maybe it'll be their grandkids, maybe their great grandkids, but to know that there can be an end at some point and we make it progressively better along the way, that doesn't mean that we should just say, oh, well, it's done. No, there's traction to be made here. So I would suggest, continuing to look at the idea of redlining, continuing to see how it affects each one of these sectors. And if you are working within one of these sectors, you already know the impacts that are there. But there are those around you who may not know it. So I challenge you to start speaking more about inequity. It's becoming one of those buzzwords where people really don't, a lot of people use it. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Like, it's becoming one of those things. But when we start talking about inequity, we're not saying equality, because you giving me the same thing that you may have may not be what I need. There's a difference between equality and equity. Equity is giving me what I need to get to the level where you are, knowing that we may have different starting points. So I want to continue to encourage you in your work, whatever sector that may be, whatever programming, whatever initiative you may be working under. This is an uphill battle, but I believe we can absolutely fight it together. Thank you for coming to the Gray Space. If you have thoughts around redlining, thoughts around just decades of disinvestment, encouraging words, ways that people can take action on your specific initiative in this work, please feel free to comment them, share them with me directly through Messenger. And of course, let me know how I can support you in amplifying your work, your impact, and finding those supporters that can continue to help us to close the gap on these inequities. Thank you.